Hey, everybody, welcome back. I'm Susan Lindner, your host of the Innovation Storytellers Show, where we seek to tell the stories that get the greatest innovations to their finish lines, whether it be success, failure, or anything else in between. It's the story that drives that acceptance, that understanding, and hopefully creates a bridge between that thing that we create and the thing that we want people to embrace. And I'm really excited to have two co-authors on the show today who have written a new book that we're going to get into that describe a little bit more about what else is driving that closeness to accepting new ideas, projects, experiences, products, services. And it's called Proximity. So let me first introduce you to my guest today. Robert C. Wolcott is the co-founder and chair of the New World Innovation Network, Twin Global. He is an adjunct professor of innovation at the Booth School of Business, University of Chicago, and an adjunct professor of executive education at the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University. His books include Grow from Within, Mastering Corporate Entrepreneurship and Innovation with Michael J. Lipitz. And Robert is also an active venture investor with nearly 30 companies under his belt, many of which are leading the proximity revolution. And Kaihan Krippendorff is the founder of Outthinker Networks, a global think tank and a professional speaker, just like yours truly. His books include Driving Innovation from Within, a guide for internal entrepreneurs. He is also a former McKinsey consultant, and I imagine has the scars to prove it. He is a strategic advisor to numerous leading corporations, and they are the authors of a bold new book called Proximity: How Coming Breakthroughs in Just-in-Time Transform Business, Society, and Daily Life. It's an insider's look at how technology is eroding the barriers of distance and time, pushing value closer and closer to demand, from 3D printing to lab-grown meats to drone-enabled healthcare. We're going to get into all of that today. So thank you both, Rob and Kaihan, for joining me today. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thanks, Susan.
Well, thank you. Great to be
All
here.
right. So let's dive in. Nobody walks in through the front door of innovation. How did you each kind of get your first step into the innovation world? Rob, let's start with you.
Oh boy. Well, it wasn't the front door of innovation. I guess it was the front door of the school library. Yeah, I was in fourth grade, and actually remember the experience. I wandered into the school library. I didn't have a lot of friends, so and I found this book called American Heritage Illustrated Book of Men and Their Inventions, and I was transfixed. It was a history of the Industrial Revolution, and I checked the book out. I rechecked it out till I couldn't check it out again, and then I kept the book. And the librarian called my mom, and I got in big trouble. And that's where it started. And I knew when I was reading that book that I wanted to be in the innovation space somehow, but I didn't know what I was going to do. Was I going to be an entrepreneur or a technologist or a researcher or a professor? I had no idea at all, but I knew that's where I wanted to go.
And what about you, Kaihan? How did you get to innovation?
I guess I don't think of myself so much as an innovation person. I'm more of a strategy person. So I was living in the Dominican Republic for a year. I didn't have very many friends. Found an ancient Chinese text called the 36 Stratagems, and that became my research. That became my first book. But the stratagems help you think differently, but has to do with narratives. There are 36 different narratives that you kind of inject into your thinking, and it reveals options that your current narratives maybe don't see. I then wrote a next book called The Way of Innovation, which takes another Chinese framework of these 5 different phases, and I think is a really helpful narrative structure to describe how innovations come to be. So I think from that, I am a little bit known as innovation, but my passion really is strategy, but it would be like innovative strategy.
Mm-hmm. And how did the two of you come together?
We were
A very
introduced.
good common friend named Jill Hellman. And
Mhm.
she's been a friend of mine and also Kaihan's for a long time. And she's part of my group, the Twin Global, the World Innovation Network. And in Twin, we say never leave serendipity to chance. And so one day I got an email, Kaihan and I got an email from Jill, and it said, "Hey guys, you guys need to meet. I don't know what'll happen, but you should meet. I'm like, okay, so I guess we should meet. And that's what happened. So big call out to Jill Hellman.
Fantastic. And this serendipity has brought you two together around this new book. So,
Yeah.
Kaihan, can you tell us a little bit about what prompted the book and why you felt the need to write it?
Rob prompted the book. And the reason I felt the need to write it was this concept of proximity, which he had already been talking about for a while. It sort of clarifies lots of things. There's this guy, John Boyd. He's the former military pilot. He developed this framework called the OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, act. And that became that's the premise for Lean and Agile and Scrum. And he describes that when you want to kind of like great fighter pilots are able to orient themselves more rapidly than the ones that they beat, and likens it to what he calls building snowmobiles in your head. So you're able to see handlebars from a bicycle, skis from a family skiing, and treads off a tank, and take these three different things that look like different things and put them together and say, aha, that's a snowmobile. So during COVID, we did a series of webinars. This is like kind of free webinars to raise money to support people that were being impacted by COVID. And Rob was one of our speakers, and his talk was about proximity. And of all the speakers we had, and by the way, we had the best of the best, like we had Amy Edmondson, we had Rita McGrath, we had like a Gary Hamel. It was just his topic of proximity was the most mentioned topic and most frequently reiterated topic, all of them. And so I found it to be a really helpful unifying concept. It's a snowmobile. And so when he was looking to write the book, I jumped at the chance to be able to help him pull that together.
It's like how God got it. Sorry.
I was just going to say, it's great. Kaihan and I are very complementary in the sort of ways we approach things and the networks of people we engage with. So it's been great having a partner in this process.
It's kind of like how God decided to invent the platypus, right? That idea of inventing a snowmobile in your head.
Yes, yes.
But, you know, some of the greatest prototypes, I mean, I love thinking about them. I love how Google Glass was kind of like a pipe cleaner and a paper clip to get this concept going, to get their prototype going, rather. So let's dive into this concept. So when you think about describing proximity to folks who are new to the concept, where do you begin?
Well, and Kaihan presents it in different ways with different audiences. So, but I guess I'll start. For me, it's digital allows us to compress all sorts of capabilities in smaller and smaller packages and distribute them all over the economy, ever closer to each moment in time and space. And because of that, digital pushes the production and provision of value, products, services, experiences, ever closer to the moment of actual demand in time and space. And we can come back and explain what that means and how profound it's. We don't just mean a little better supply chain management. We mean literally setting up technology platforms and business models to encourage us to procrastinate, to wait until there's an actual customer ready to buy that product, service, or experience. And that's a completely different way to look at the world than the industrial age. So this is where we get foresight about where the world's going. A quick tagline we use, Susan, is anything, anywhere, anytime. That's where everything is going. Increasingly, the ability to have anything, anywhere, anytime. And by the way, we don't mean that's all positive either. We're just saying that is where it's going. So let's make sure we do the best we can with it.
So let's talk about that for a minute. Can you give us some examples? I know there's some great ones in your book and I want to get into them, but what immediately comes to mind when you think about that immediacy and that proximity that's coming from proximity?
I think like one that we can all get our heads around. We have lots of examples in the book of innovators that are doing things that are actually happening now, but we don't think they're happening. But let me give you one that rather is something that I think most people listening to this would get. You're at a movie theater and you want to get a soda, right? And then you go to this soda machine, this Coca-Cola soda machine, and you press some buttons and you can get a diet cherry vanilla Sprite, right? And that machine allows us to give us more of what we want. So we have greater variety and closer to when we want it. And it also delivers at a lower cost. Why? Because the soda water is mixed with the syrup, not miles and miles away at a bottling plant, not weeks ahead and then shipped to in a bottle to the movie theater. It's mixed there. So we can say the value of soda is what's worth the syrup. Yeah. But having it mixed in the right proportion in the combination I want, that's more valuable. So here what we see is we see the value being created closer to when I want it now and where I want it in the movie theater. So that's one that I think most people can get their heads around. Now you can now apply that to other agricultural products, other food products. You can now apply that to work. You can now apply that to health. You can apply that to energy. And across every sector, you see the movement towards approximate solution.
Well, just to build on that, that's the Coca-Cola freestyle machine that Kaihan was talking about, of course. An interesting wrinkle in the book, we talk about Dr. Jeffrey Ling, a military doctor, and they kept running out of drugs in the war zone, which is not shocking because you're in a war zone. But what did shock me, I didn't realize until Dr. Ling told me this, is we have generic drug shortages in the United States at hospitals and clinics all the time. And these are at the top hospitals and clinics because all of our generic drugs are made overseas. And so Dr. Ling said, this is ridiculous. If I had the right chemistry set, I could make the drugs myself. So he went back to the United States, got a big grant from DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, worked with a team from MIT and created a system. It's now a company called On Demand Pharmaceuticals. And they can make whatever generic drug you want right there on the spot. And it just sits there with raw materials it's the size of a refrigerator. And it sits there with the raw materials waiting for you to say, I need 300 doses of ciprofloxacin. And then hours later, out come 300 doses of ciprofloxacin, exactly the same as you get at the pharmacy. And this is validated by the FDA. And here's the punchline. It's the same basic idea as the Coca-Cola freestyle machine. In fact, Dr. Ling worked with the same team at MIT that worked with Coca-Cola to help them build the freestyle machine in the first place. So this stuff can be applied in really any environment. It's not just physical products. We happen to be talking about physical products, but it's also digital products, physical products, and everything in between.
So that, which is just astounding, right? When you think about all the gatekeeping that takes place in the world of medicine too, right? I just feel like the physical sensation of going up to a pharmacy and there's a counter and there's a big space and there's even a high wall, or sometimes I can only look at the pharmacy over this much space. And so it's really radically changing how we think about who's in charge of what too, right? There are shifts that wind up happening here because a doctor can make these drugs, not just a pharmacist, right? There's an implication of title and seniority and capability shift as well. I think there are probably very few senior executives who have what they would refer to as a secretary, right?
Yeah.
We've taken on the task of typing, and to your concept of pushing the digital frontier, I just think of the shift from typewriter to computer just eliminated a group of people who had a specialized skill set who now said, executive, take on this role. You'll now be typing. Right. And I can imagine those senior executives going, wait, what? You want me to learn how to type? Doctors are pushing a button, right, and getting the medicine they need, watching their medicine effectively be formulated and I don't want to say 3D printed, but manufactured in their office.
By the way, where Susan, to your example, where the word computer originally came from?
No.
It was years ago, you would have a bunch of people sitting in a room computing stuff. And at the time, to be fair, they were mostly women, and they would sit there and they would compute stuff. And in French, it was something like computoire or computeuse or something like this. And they were the computers.
That's right.
And then somebody said, oh, now this equipment can do it. Let's call it a computer.
Right. I remember that from that movie, Hidden Figures.
Yes,
that's it.
Right.
Yeah.
And they were those women were called computers, right?
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah, I think that we're going to see this, and this is not entirely new. It's just accelerating. In my third book was Outthink the Competition, And in that, I have a chapter that is titled Why Netflix Will Break My Heart. It turned out to be a prediction that didn't happen. But my argument was that the middleman is going to go away because Netflix at the time was basically taking other people's content and then distributing it to people who wanted it. And the value of that assembly diminishes and the profit starts pooling towards the edges, the production and then the delivery. Of course, Netflix saw that and they started doing production. So I think that's where value goes. So I recently did something that I published in Harvard Business Review, and we look at these 15 pairs of companies and look at ones that are outperforming the others. And what you see, one thing that you see that the outperformers talk about is being the borrowed road, being at the point of demand. And so that, I mean, you can call that lots of different things, but I think that you will see that. You'll see the profits start pooling towards the edges. You're either making the syrup or you're standing in front of the customer when they want it. Yeah. And that's where we need to be.
Yeah.
Well, 3D printing will have that impact across manufacturing. It's very early still. And so, Susan, we're in that point where a lot of people say, oh, people have been talking about 3D printing for a long time. See, that's never going to happen. But you know what? It's happening. And for real value added applications where people are making money doing it now, but it's at the edges. It's in small implementations here and there. And what happens, like any disruptive technology, over time, there's a learning curve. And over time, we get better. And eventually it transitions into core markets.
Right. And I totally agree. All these things start in the niche, right? Everything starts on the fringe. It doesn't start off as a mass market concept like this. And it can't, right? There's so many variables. The complexity of what it took us to get to regular old manufacturing, right? Yes. Much less DIY manufacturing is a whole other thing. So let's walk through some of these examples so my audience here gets it. First off, the book is intended for whom? Like who should be really thinking about buying this book?
Well, our first level, our core audience are decision makers who have to worry about the future. So these could be senior executives at enterprises. These could be investors. Kaihan and I are talking to lots of groups where they're trying to figure out where and how to place their money. I invest a lot in early stage companies. Entrepreneurs who are trying to envision the future. So anybody who needs much better foresight as to where the world's going and has to make decisions against it, that's our audience. So it could be policymakers as well, and thinking about how to position their economies and their societies most effectively. So that's our core, those are our core audience. But really everybody's affected by the future, and the book is intended to help give us foresight that we can use in any environment.
Yeah, I think we could say maybe there's like maybe 3 audiences that will shape the future, and everyone needs to think or would benefit from thinking about, because this is where it's going. If you buy groceries, if you drive a car, if you live in a house, right? So that's everyone. But I think the people who are building the businesses, so as entrepreneurs and business leaders, investors and regulators are the ones that are going to make the decisions that are going to determine whether the proximate future that we lead to is
a good one,
a nirvana or not.
And I'm sure there's a military reality for this as well, right? Thinking about where to create kind of strategic possibilities for nation states or for ourselves at home here, and thinking about how to create opportunities in proximity, right, that are able to address really crisis-oriented moments too, not just long-term future opportunities.
Well, I'm glad you brought it up, Susan. I know you have some experience in the government and military space. We have chapters, Kaihan and I have chapters organized around realms of life. So how we work, how we eat, how we create and produce, how we prevent and cure, how we power and how we defend. And the only chapter where Kaihan and I said, you know what, we can handle all these other, we can figure all that out. We brought lots of experts in to make sure that we vetted what we were writing, that we didn't sound like idiots, that we really got it right. But the only chapter where we brought in a colleague who's really focused, knows an industry, is defense. Because the defense space is just really different. There's some obvious stuff, and then there's some super not obvious stuff that you just have to understand. And so we brought in my good friend and a co-author on Grow From Within, my book from 2009, Dr. Michael Lippitz. And Mike has been in the defense space his whole career. So he really helped give us a solid picture. But I'd say fast forwarding to today, unfortunately, we're seeing the future of warfare right now in Ukraine. And obviously I say unfortunately because I wish that the conflict wasn't happening at all. But you know, God bless them. The Ukrainians have responded to this crisis so quickly. If you look at, for instance, drones, before the crisis, they had a very small presence of drone industry. And today, over 90% of all the drones used by the Ukrainians in Ukraine are produced in Ukraine on the fly for specific applications. And that's not gone unnoticed. So our own US military, and you could look this up, this is all public information now, but the Air Force has a series of programs called Blue Horizons. And I love what they've been doing. The military is good at what they call mission focus and mission clarity. So mission focus is, are we focused on the right things? And mission clarity is, do people properly understand the mission? The people who need to understand it, do they really understand it? And so last year, I think it was last year, the Blue Horizons program said, we need to have the capability to go from nothing to a drone ready to fly, to do specific reconnaissance or blow kinetic effects, blow stuff up, whatever, within 48 hours. And they did it. They achieved it, which is impressive. But then they said for this year, they said, now we need to get to 24 hours. And guess what? They already did that too. And so you're seeing the ability to have small scale production of things like drones right there in the field, right at the coalface, as they used to say in mining, and that can respond to the near-term objectives of the team right there. And you don't have to contact home office. You don't have to wait 6 months for a new allocation and the ship to show up. You can create it right there in the field. And so we're seeing this future roll out right now.
And that shift, right? I mean, I think digital proximity, if we're talking about that, as being driven, as well as the internet and most technological advances in my experience, is driven by porn, gambling, and the military. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, probably in that order too.
Right. And so like when I first started hearing about your book, I thought my first experience of proximity was online dating. Like I now have a wealth of, I mean, you bring up a lot of fantastic business angles here, but the first from my eyes was like Match.com, right? I have the proximity of really not going to my local bar and meeting someone, but rather I have the proximity, 1,000 men in my phone. Forget about 1,000 songs in your pocket. There are lots of things happening in your pocket these days. That really...
Well, Susan, I don't know if you remember, but years ago, even before Match rose up, and I'm somewhat older than the two of you, but I was doing some early online dating, and I was telling a friend of mine, this is before it became a normal thing, right? And I was telling a friend of mine, and she said, well, I don't know if I would do that. I said, why? And she said, well, because they could be lying. And I said, they don't lie at bars.
I was like, and I've definitely never given out a fake name or a fake phone number to anybody in my life. Sure. Right. I think you might need an adjunct chapter, one more new edition.
Yeah. We were actually speaking of a chapter. There was going to be a chapter called Love.
Oh.
And then we kind of folded it into Create. So it was, but then there's, I think if you also think of it as the matching of demand and supply, need and solution, then it also opens up in lots of ways. You may already have the drone, and then but you can't find the need of the drone. I mean, think about how many people inside companies have a solution, but they can't find an internal need. We can't make that match, and then you apply that to work. And then you apply that to skills. And I think there is a gross inefficiency in the current norms of marketplaces that proximity can help solve and is helping to solve.
Yeah. Well, I particularly love this idea around how we eat, like looking at the controlled environment agriculture, right? Where you can now be producing Like we are eating whatever we want, whenever we want, and chefs from all over the world are sourcing the strangest ingredients, strange by art. I was at an innovation event at the Austrian consulate last Thursday. It was New York Tech Week here in New York, and the hors d'oeuvres, where I was expecting to be past little quiches and pigs in a blanket, were actually protein bars made of 17% buffalo beetle powder. And that was the protein, right, portion of my meal at the Austrian consulate last week. So let's talk a little bit about how you see agriculture changing.
Wow.
and what's happening with proximity in that industry.
Yeah, so we talk a lot about controlled environment agriculture. People think greenhouses, but it's much more than that, vertical farming, et cetera. And in many contexts, it's not ready yet. It's not economically viable, but there are contexts where it's very economically viable and it's already underway. And what's happening is it's getting better and people are learning. But one of the things we discovered during the research is there's this beautiful synchronicity between distributed power, or in other words, proximate power, and distributed agriculture. When we can unlock sustainable, reliable, proximate electricity, proximate power, we can unlock proximate agriculture. So I'll give you an example of where it's working right now. Last week, I was in Dubai for Emirates Airlines. And in late 2022, I visited Dubai and visited Bustanica, which is the largest vertical farm in the world right now in operation. It's a partnership with Emirates. And the leafy greens at this place were as good as any French farmer's market. And no offense to your French listeners. It was fantastic. But the exciting part for us as authors of proximity was the next day I got on my flight back to New York, the lettuce in my salad was picked at that facility the night before. Now compare these two models. Today, for the most part, they would grow leafy greens in Spain or North Africa. They'd harvest them weeks in advance, send them on a ship, put them into a warehouse, and you'd waste a third of it, which is what typically happens in the world of food. We waste a third of all the food created in the world goes to waste. In this new model, Emirates grows only what it needs miles from the actual point of demand. And they pick it, it's fresh, it's fantastic, and there's zero waste. And by the way, Emirates bought the entire company in February.
Wow.
They see it as it was a partnership before, but they just in February announced they were buying the whole thing. And they see it as a strategic acquisition for the future of their industry. So this proximity thing is starting to become economical in food. And maybe Kaihan, if you want to add, but the place I'm most excited about is lab-grown meat, because you could create meat in a space not much bigger than this room instead of needing thousands of acres for cattle. And you eliminate all the ethical issues because it's actual meat, but there are no animals involved. You eliminate the space requirements, the logistical challenges, the environmental issues. And there are companies right now, we talk about, for instance, Aleph Farms in Israel, that is really far along in creating custom meat. And by the way, they can customize meat for specific chefs. So you as a celebrity chef can have your own meat that only you can use.
Wow.
You couldn't do that before.
Gordon Ramsay's own infallible meats.
Exactly.
He can still find a way to yell at somebody when they cook it, right? He can
it could yell at you. Probably they could make the meat yell at you when you bite into it.
Right.
Kaihan, you've thought a lot about models and food and existing players, et cetera, and proximity.
Yeah, I think you do the same process of any industry, right? You think about where's value initialized, and then how does the value get created? And the growing of the meat, it's grossly inefficient.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes a long time. Why do you need to only grow one crop of bananas every year? In a controlled environment, the natural gestation period is shorter than a year. So you could have multiple crops in 1 year. But you don't have to. I think there are immediate opportunities while the cost of parts of that value chain come down and start becoming competitive to what we have now. There are opportunities immediately available to you. I'm on the advisory board of a company that imports yucca and plantains from Latin America. They process it there. So they'll cut it up, they'll cook it, they'll freeze it, they'll put it into a box, and then later you'll find it at a grocery store. But so we started experimenting, exploring, what does P=0 look like? What does the moment of when demand arises, you can create the value just then and there, and everything between where we are now and that hypothetical state is a moment of opportunity. And so all we did was we invested a little bit of money to hire a scientist in a university to figure out what the formulation would be to use plantains as the food ink for a 3D printed product. And so now we have the formula. And so we know what the right proportion of ingredients are. Now, that's something that doesn't take a lot of money, that doesn't require a lot of technology, but it could create a competitive advantage. If you can print something beautiful just across the street from the restaurant or the hotel or the school that wants something interesting, then you can create an advantage. And there are examples in the book of people, for example, a woman in Holland that's doing this with food that's about to be wasted. So not food waste, but almost wasted food, grinding it up into a paste and then producing these beautiful pieces of edible art that are then served in high-end restaurants.
Wow. It's the opportunities, right? I can imagine for any food entrepreneur, right? Just thinking about, or agricultural entrepreneur, of how this could work is it gets all of your cylinders firing. I also want to talk about health, because we've seen the wearables revolution come. I know I actually thought that my Apple Watch would make me exercise. It does not. Just for the record, I don't think Apple gives an appropriate.
Susan, you can add a shock, so like the dog collar thing, you could add a shock, and that gets you moving.
Yeah.
Damn, I didn't know. Good to know. I'm gonna check into that feature. I still think they should offer a disclaimer on the Apple Watch when you buy that. I do know how much I'm sleeping, so yay. But tell us a little bit more about how you see, like we talked about 3D printing on the pharmaceutical side, but what else are you seeing that the digitization of our healthcare is actually going to make us healthier? What do you see?
Well, in the book, in each of the how we chapters, how we work, how we power, how we create, etc., Kaihan and I, after writing each chapter, we then tried to tease out key insights, and we put them right at the top of each chapter. And we did this to make the book easier to navigate, but also to reflect the fact that proximity looking different in different environments. It has different implications. And probably the second most exciting insight for me of any of the chapters is the fact that proximity in healthcare, proximity compels healthcare from curing things to preventing things. And by the way, we didn't just say that it helps make it better. We have the opportunity to. We say it compels healthcare to prevention as opposed to curing. And for a very simple reason. If you have your Apple Watch or an Oura Ring or whatever, I mean, it's still pretty rudimentary. I have a Garmin on right now. But imagine where we'll be with health monitoring in a decade or 20 years. Oh my gosh. We'll be tracking every iota of activity in your body. And there'll be an AI system in the background scanning weak signals, doing analyses, and it'll send you a note and say, Rob, it looks like you need to go to the doctor. Now, by the way, the doctor might come to you, might be virtual, set that all aside. So Rob, go to the doctor. So I go to the doctor in the future, go to the doctor, and the doctor says, you know what, Rob, it looks like you have stage 0 pancreatic cancer. Not a big deal. We can solve that. Here's what we need to do. Now compare that to what we do today. I'm doubled over. I'm not, by the way, just using his example. I'm doubled over in pain. I finally go to the doctor. I say, Doc, what's going on? They do tests, and then they say, well, you know what? It looks like you have stage 4 pancreatic cancer. There's nothing we can do about it except make you comfortable. So see how dramatically different this is. And when you can find those weak signals, you can solve problems before they're even a problem. And this is doubly important to me because my father died at 63 in 2004 of an aortal aneurysm. And he had just had a full physical 2 months before. The doctor said to him, my dad said, the doctor said to him, Bob, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. You're in great shape for 63. 2 months later, he was dead. And so I'd like to think that the kind of health monitoring that's coming in the near future would be able to prevent something like that from ever even occurring.
Wow. And I think of us as humans too. We have a lot of early warning systems. I'm sorry for your father. We also are not very good at taking the preventative medicine, are we?
Yes, that's right. So this will take, I love situations where, I mean, I wish we could all make ourselves better, more effective, more thoughtful. Of course, I want to do that. But, you know, it's really nice when a technology can slide in there and allow us to be stupid and to be better without compromises. I love that. I have to admit.
Yeah.
And I think that's why AI is also approximate technology. I think that humans are terrible decision makers. We have a lot of biases, and just look at the state of our health and the state of our economies and the state of our conflicts. And I think AI becomes like a good mentor or coach for us.
Well,
so yeah.
You're the strategy expert. Let's talk a little bit about how business leaders can actually use these concepts around proximity and start applying them to their strategies now. Where would a business leader who says, it's my summertime, this is when I kind of sit on my porch and I grab a glass of Cabernet and I really start thinking about, what do the next 3 years look like? What do the next 5 years look like? I have not met a CEO or a chief innovation officer who does not have an AI strategy sitting on their desk at the moment. How much they're losing in those strategies, or quantifying ROI, or figuring out whether or not they're actually hitting targets at the mission is another.
Right.
So let's just add one more layer of complexity to our lovely business friends and ask that question is, how do we begin to incorporate concepts of proximity into our work now in thinking about the next couple of years out?
Yeah, I think this is a great time to zoom out and envision P equals 0. And then zoom in and say, what could we do now to step into that future or shape that future now? And what we found are really 4 steps that are helpful. Number 1 is envision P equals 0. Someone is hungry and the pizza that you make is already in their mouth. That's P equals 0. Step 2, what are the barriers that stand in the way of us achieving that right now? Right now, the grain is grown a season before far away. Right now, it is ground far away. We don't know that the person wants the food until after they feel hunger, right? So all of these barriers. Then you say, what are the technologies? And there are certain proximate technologies, whether that is blockchain or distributed energy or digitization or 3D printing, or all these technologies. Where are technologies that could remove some of those barriers? You marry those two, and then that reveals some opportunities. Could we use this technology or this trend to remove this barrier? And then you just sort of prioritize them: easy, difficult, high, low impact. And from that, by the time you get back from the summer, you will have 1 or 2 things that you could do that are economical and create advantage today, but then commit you to creating the proximate future without having to freak out everyone about your vision of food being put in someone's mouth before they're hungry.
Yeah.
You know?
And it gets you into the game too. You learn.
Yep.
And is there like a means of identifying this strategy, like using these 4 points? I'm thinking about the announcement that Domino's made last week. The CEO of Domino's, Russell Weiner, he said that the big moment, they've created a technology now where the moment you begin your online order, that their AI will make a judgment call and start making the pizza when you start the order. And he talked about the efficiency that this brings, knowing that if you typically order pepperoni pineapple, that chances are you're going to order pepperoni pineapple again. And I know, Robert, that's your favorite. And then we'll just, I'm watching your stomach go.
Well, also they should add, Susan, if you add pineapple to your pizza, you also need therapy. So they can add in a virtual therapy session.
Maybe you'll tap into like Dr. Phil's new Doctor on Demand thing, right? As soon as like,
great,
I ordered pineapple pepperoni, schedule your next 50 minutes with a therapist.
Well, I'd like to add to the By the way, what Kaihan was describing was part of the strategy workbook. So we have a proximity strategy workbook, which is the appendix
in the
book. So yeah, we talk about crazy, far out, fun stuff, but then we get really applied at the end. But there are also two ways to think about this. So if you're trying to envision that brand new business, say you're an investor, an entrepreneur, corporate entrepreneur, perhaps something brand new. Another way to think about it, though, is to look at my existing business, my existing supply chain, and say, where are the biggest risks? Where are the biggest challenges of outstocks? Or maybe I'm doing just fine with a particular input, but if there's a tsunami that knocks out a production facility in Thailand, which, by the way, has happened in the past, what are we going to do about it? So you go through your whole supply chain, identify the biggest risks, and you can today, not 10 years from now, today, you can usually find approximate solution for those to start to roll out that you can quantify the value of doing so. And so at point solution situations in your existing supply chain, you can take a proximity strategy and make some money in the near term, which solves a problem in a radically new way, but also gets you into the game and you learn in the process.
So I think like these strategies are super helpful to get people thinking and really not just identifying the risks, right? We all know how to do a SWOT analysis, but there's something about even getting closer to a customer than we ever have before.
Yes.
I do a lot of empathy mapping in my storytelling work, and I just encourage more and more leaders to use those kind of design thinking principles to really step into the shoes, or at least as close to in proximity to those shoes as possible. Okay, we're coming up to the top of the hour, so I want to make sure we get in the 3 questions I ask everyone who comes on the show. Number 1, what is the greatest innovation of all time?
Indoor plumbing.
Indoor
plumbing. I think that if we compare some like kind of recent big innovations to just our historical innovations, I think we do appreciate that using coal, indoor plumbing have been hugely transformed. But great innovations, they eventually recede into the background because they become the norm. And we need to appreciate that.
Yes. And as a former public health practitioner, I'll applaud your choice on that one too. So
I have always been captivated by the notion of the very first moment when a hominid, so it could be homo or it could be a predator, we don't know, did the first cave painting. I mean, what motivated that animal to pick up that ochre and start scribbling on a wall and said, oh, that's kind of cool.
By the way,
that was like the light went on.
The anthroarchaeologists have done the research and found that those paintings were done by a female hand, not a male hand.
Okay.
And it's completely changed how I think about those cave paintings now.
That makes perfect sense. But my point is, whenever that first hominid thing
wanted to communicate,
whatever, decided to create a representation of something and said, oh, that's cool, that was like a huge light went on in our little corner of the universe. And for me, that's probably the most exciting moment of epiphany.
Yeah. My next question is, if you could join any innovation team in human history, which would it be?
Oh, Bletchley Park, the deciphering of the Enigma machine during World War II.
Good one. Kaihan, what do you think?
I've got too many answers to that. I think there's so much going on, and there are so many. And the innovator isn't the obvious innovator. I don't think that they are sitting in a lab in an innovation office on a team. Agreed. I think that they are the 6 billion people that are just.
So Kaihan, you're team humanity.
Yes, I'm team humanity. Yes, right, exactly.
Good.
Okay, my last question is, what is something that has not yet been innovated or invented that either pisses you off or you wish it existed that does not exist today?
I think there needs to be some kind of like global sensing, like need sensing device of some sort. I don't know if it's like a good goggles or a virtual reality thing or an implant, but if they could know what time I need to be at the airport and get my car to me when I need to leave, we don't need airports anymore. We could just get right on the plane. I think that's what we need.
It's related. If you read the last chapter of Proximity about virtual reality and space, which are both 100% proximate, by the way, the post-virtual world, which is after the point where we can't tell the difference between normal reality and virtual. We're in the post-virtual space, and it's going to happen in our lifetime, Susan, and I can't wait.
Wow. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining me on the call. Where can people find the book and find you?
Proximitybook.net. Proximity, it's available. There it is. It's available all the great places books are sold. And they can find me always on LinkedIn, Robert C. Wolcott.
LinkedIn as well.
Fantastic. Guys, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
We look forward to more great conversations around all things around proximity. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Susan. Thanks,
Okay,
Kaihan.
thanks, Susan. Thanks.